Hello, listeners. My name is Cliff Ratza. I'm the author of two ongoing series of novels, the Lightning Brain series and its sequel, the Keeper series. And in addition to being an author and a writing coach, I teach at universities and have a consulting business. If you would like to learn more about me, my books, or my writing coach activities, please contact Prime Solutions via lightningbrainseries.com website. Now, I try to make videos that I think authors and writers and most people might enjoy listening to. And I try to cover material that you might not see or hear on the news or in other YouTube videos. I figure that if I can't find a different point of view, there's no reason for me to add something that you can find elsewhere. Well now, the title of this video is Absolute Power Corrupts Absolutely. Lord Acton knew that long ago. Well, here are some of the reasons why Lord Acton might have known that. And let me ask first if you might know how the Ukraine got its name. Well, the name Ukraine was first used in reference to a part of the territory known as Kievan Rus in the 12th century. The name has been used in a variety of ways since the 12th century, referring to numerous lands on the border between Poland and Kievan Rus, or its successor states. So, think of the Ukraine as being a borderland. And here's a detailed Wikipedia definition of the Ukraine. It is a republic in southeastern Europe on the Black Sea, ruled by the Khazars from the 7th to 9th centuries, by the Ruruk princes, and then with the Mongol conquest in the 13th century. And then by Lithuania, Poland, and Russia. The Ukraine is one of the 4 original republics that formed the Soviet Union in 1922. Millions died during the famine of 1932 to 1933, resulting from Stalin's collectivization of agriculture. And millions more died during the Nazi occupation, 1941 to 1944. The Ukraine unilaterally declared its independence in 1990. The annexation of Crimea by Russia took place in 2014. The country chiefly consists of lowlands, an economy based on rich agriculture and mineral resources, and on the majority heavy industries of the Donets Basin. Official language, Ukrainian, and Russian is also widely spoken. There's a Christian majority. The capital is Kiev. Population is about 44 million and has an area of 600,000 square kilometers, or 990 square miles. Okay, now to the Crimea. How did the Crimea get its name? The Crimean interior came under the control of the Turco-Mongol Golden Horde from 1239 to 1441. The name Crimea originates as the name of the provincial capital of the Golden Horde, a city now known as Starya Krem. Well, now that we have a handle on the geography, let's find out about some people of interest. Who is Lord Acton? John Emmerich Edward Acton. First Baron Acton is a historian, politician, and writer. He was born in 1834 and died in 1902. He is perhaps best known for the remark, "Power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Great men are almost always bad men." He made that statement in a letter written to an Anglican bishop. And there is more to know regarding lords and politics and geography. Let's consider the charge of the Light Brigade. The charge of the Light Brigade was a failed military action involving the British Light Cavalry led by Lord Cardigan against Russian forces during the Battle of Balaclava on October 25, 1854, in the Crimean War. Lord Raglan had intended to send the Light Brigade to prevent the Russians from removing captured guns from overrun Turkish positions, a task for which the Light Cavalry was well suited. But, as in military operations of all times, there was miscommunication in the chain of command, and the Light Brigade was instead sent on a frontal assault against a different artillery battery. The Light Brigade suffered horrendous casualties, and there were no decisive gains. The events were subject of Alfred Lord Tennyson's narrative poem, The Charge of the Light Brigade, published 6 weeks after the event, which took place in 1854. Its lines emphasize the valor of the cavalry in bravely carrying out their orders, regardless of the nearly inevitable outcome. I'll read you the first verse. Half a league, half a league, half a league onward, all in the valley of death, rode the 600. Forward the Light Brigade, charge for the guns, he said. Into the valley of death rode the 600. Okay, now I'm going to read from the middle of the poem. Cannon to the right of them, cannon to the left of them, cannon behind them, volleyed and thundered, stormed at with shot and shell, while horse and hero fell. They that had fought so well came through the jaws of death, back from the mouth of hell. All that was left of them, left of the 600. And then the final verse. When can their glory fade? Oh, the wild charge they made. All the world wondered. Honor the charge of the Light Brigade. Honor the Light Brigade. Noble 600. Well, have any listeners heard about or read any of the Flashman books? One is titled Flashman at the Charge, and it chronicles the charge of the Light Brigade. For the hero of the series, Harry Flashman, was there. Here's a little bit about the Flashman series. The Flashman Papers is a series of novels and short stories written by George MacDonald Fraser. The first was published in 1969. The books center on the exploits of the fictional protagonist, Harry Flashman. He is a cowardly British soldier, rake, and cad who is placed in a series of real historical incidents between 1839 and 1894. I think of him as being similar to Forrest Gump, although Forrest Gump was a nicer person. While the incidents and much of the detail in the novels have a factual background, Flashman's actions in the stories are either fictional or Fraser uses the actions of unidentified individuals and assigns them to Flashman. In the 1857 novel by Thomas Hughes, Tom Brown's School Days, which is Hughes's version of the character of a bully at rugby school who is expelled for drunkenness, that is Harry Flashman. The character was then developed further by Fraser and appeared in the first novel called Flashman. Fraser went on to write a total of 11 novels and one collection of short stories featuring Harry Flashman. And Flashman is a cad and a coward, but when faced with certain death, he performs very well. So it's a very clever series of novels. I've read them. And the Flashman at the Charge is the novel that heralds the charge of the Light Brigade. Well, now to a book that Lord Acton would have understood very well. It is Bloodlands, Europe between Hitler and Stalin, written by noted Yale historian Timothy Snyder in 2010. The book's introduction and afterward have been updated in a new release prompted by the Ukrainian war. It is perhaps the definitive historical analysis of Eastern European catastrophes caused by two of the 20th century's most deadly dictators. Well, the book is thick and factually correct and combines a historian's point of view with that of an author's emotive attention to the individuals who suffered. I'd like to read you a summary I came across. Here it is. It's titled, Savagery in the East, How Stalin and Hitler Turned the Borderlands of Eastern Europe into a Killing Field. The story of World War II, like that of most wars, usually gets told by the victors. Diplomatic and military accounts are set largely in the West and star the morally upright allies, United States, Britain, and Soviet Union, in battles against fascism. The Holocaust gets its own separate history as a case apart in its genocidal intent and human tragedy. Timothy Snyder's Bloodlands, Europe between Hitler and Stalin, forces a dramatic shift in these perceptions. First, there is the setting, the flat and marshy eastern borderlands, inhabited by Jews, Poles, Ukrainians, Belarusians, and others, that Stalin and Hitler turned into what Mr. Snyder calls the Bloodlands. No GIs fought on or liberated this soil, so the fate of its people never entered the collective Western imagination. Yet this was the true heart of the European conflict. By Mr. Snyder's conservative reckoning, 14 million people were shot, deliberately starved, or gassed, while Hitler and Stalin were in power. All these dead were non-combatants. Mr. Snyder puts a third of the total on Stalin's account. Both Hitler and Stalin dreamed of a new European order, one in the name of a master race, the other of a master class. Their visions met in the borderlands. In his use of political mass murder to achieve it, Stalin was a trailblazer, an elder statesman of terror. The Soviet-made famine of 1932 to 1933, which killed more than 3 million Ukrainians, launched an era of horror that ended only with the end of World War II. Among the other goals of Bloodlands, Mr. Snyder attempts to put the Holocaust in context, to restore it, in a sense, to the history of the wider European conflict. This is a task that no historian can attempt without risking controversy. Yet, far from minimizing Jewish suffering, Bloodlands gives a fuller picture of the Nazi killing machine. Auschwitz, which wasn't purely a death camp, lives on in our memory due in large part to those who lived to tell the tale. Through his access to Eastern European sources, Mr. Snyder also takes the reader to places like Baba Yar, Treblinka, and Belzec. These were Nazi mass murder sites that left virtually no survivors. Yet Mr. Snyder's book does make it clear that Hitler's final solution, the purge of European Jewry, was not a fully original idea. A decade before, Stalin had set out to annihilate the Ukrainian peasant class, whose national sentiments he perceived as a threat to his Soviet utopia. The collectivization of agriculture was the weapon of choice. Implemented savagely, collectivization brought famine. In the spring of 1933, people in Ukraine were dying at a rate of 10,000 per day. Stalin then turned on other groups in the Soviet Union, starting with the kulaks, supposedly richer farmers whom Stalin said needed to be liquidated as a class, and various ethnic minorities. In the late 1930s, Mr. Snyder argues, the most persecuted national group in Europe wasn't, as many of us would assume, Jews in Nazi Germany, a relatively small community of 400,000, whose numbers declined after the imposition of race laws forced many into emigration, at a time when this was still possible. According to Mr. Snyder, the hardest hit at that time were the 600,000 Poles living within the Soviet Union. Barbarism reached new lows after the German Wehrmacht and the Red Army invaded Poland in 1939. The Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact, signed in August, a week before the Blitzkrieg, had split sovereign Poland between Nazi and Soviet allies. The invading Germans obeyed orders not to spare the civilian population, but the Soviets were more experienced then at brutality. In the spring of 1940, Stalin ordered the murder of nearly 22,000 Polish officers in what came to be known as the Katyn massacres. Hundreds of thousands of other people from enemy classes and nationalities were deported to the east, where many died in the gulags. Plans for the Holocaust fell into place after Hitler's surprise attack on the Soviet Union in 1941 failed to produce the quick victory that the Nazis expected. The killing began east of the Ribbentrop-Molotov line, and most of the victims were shot over pits. Nearly half of the millions of Jews killed by the Germans died in lands taken from the Soviets. In territory that the Nazis occupied in 1939, the extermination started later. The innovation of the gas chamber in the main death factories at Treblinka, Chelmno, Belzec, Majdanek, and Sobibor, which took in Jews only to kill them. By the time the 6th death camp on the line at Birkenau near Auschwitz in early 1943, more than 3/4 of the Jews killed in the Holocaust, and the most Soviet and Polish Jews were already dead. In the grim postscript to World War II, millions of Poles, Ukrainians, Balts, and Germans were ethnically cleansed from lands they'd occupied for generations. Churchill and Roosevelt let Stalin redraw the Europe's borders, and all the bloodlands fell into his hands. Unlike Hitler, Stalin realized his dreams of global empire. His last murderous act was to launch another anti-Semitic purge in late 1952 before he himself died in early 1953. Bloodlands manages to clarify as well as darken our view of this era. To dismiss the Nazis or the Soviets as beyond historical understanding is to fall into their moral trap. That's what the author Tim Snyder writes. The safer route is to realize that their motives for mass killing, however revolting to us, made sense to them. So, Putin's thinking about the Ukrainian war is steeped in the bloody history of Europe's 20th century. And as Snyder warns us in another of his books on tyranny, today's threats to freedom and democracy due to a new crop of tyrants is real. You should listen to Michael Shermer's interviews of Tim Snyder as well as Douglas Murray that explain what steps the civilized world must take to avoid repeats of the 20th century's military catastrophes. I read the book before searching and finding other summaries, but they are all similar to the one I just read. And if you read the book, you'll come across atrocities that make what you hear on the news regarding Russian soldiers seem mild. And that tells me that human nature has always had a stain of inhuman behavior. The famed screenwriter and writing consultant Robert McKee says that no matter how vivid an author's imagination is, someone, somewhere has been there and done that long, long ago. Well, that'll do it for this video. Thank you for listening, and bye-bye until next time.